Hi everyone, I'm Lena Waslick, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for watching my TED Talk. I want you to go back in your memory and think about the last time that you had a conversation about education. It could be with your spouse, it could be with perhaps some of your students, a colleague perhaps. Just think about this conversation. And I'm willing to bet that no matter how the conversation started and no matter how positive the entire conversation was, eventually it turns into talking about the issues. And if you're talking about issues and you're talking to a fellow educator, you might talk about things like testing or public perception, maybe funding, even achievement, time in the classroom, time for administrators, trust of our communities and of our parents. We might even talk about teacher prep or teacher retention, professional learning, increased demands, decreased funds, respect, and teacher pay. These are always probably among the biggest issues that we talk about when education comes up, when we're discussing it socially. If you're talking to non-educators, a lot of times that conversation quickly turns and you're talking about the failure of public education. Or you have somebody say, oh, well, in business, we do this, you should do this, where our business is very different than their business. Or, if they just did this, it would fix it. So there's lots of issues that we could acknowledge between educators and non-educators, but we really disagree on where it is that they stem. Some people will say that it's stemming from teachers, ill-prepared teachers. Others will say that it's pay. They were not getting enough respect and pay in order to attract the most qualified candidates. And others will say that it's funding. However, I don't know that any of those are really the true issue, and I think that that's the most interesting thing to dissect. So what is that true issue? It's politics. And not only is it politics, it's partisan politics. Every politician is going to discuss education. And why? Regardless of party, it's something that every person has experience with. Everybody's gone through the educational system, and while that does not make them an expert, some people believe that it does, they feel qualified to talk about this. And it's from the very low-level politics, boards of education, local politics, to the presidency. Every single politician is going to talk about this. So, partisan politics are a complication of education. Now, this goes all the way back. If you want to do a little history here, it goes all the way back. Our founding fathers knew education was important way before they were revolutionaries. They went to school. We have John Adams and John Hancock went to Harvard. You have James Madison, who went to the College of New Jersey, which is now Princeton. You also had Alexander Hamilton, who went to King's College, which is Columbia in New York City. They knew that education was important. Now, their education is vastly different than the education that we deliver in our schools. They had what's called a classical education. They studied Greek, Latin, sometimes French. They talked about grammar and logic and rhetoric, math, geometry, astronomy. All of these subjects were very ingrained in what it was they were doing. And in fact, to get into these colleges back then, all you had to do, I shouldn't say all you had to do, what you had to do was prove that you were, in fact, fluent and could understand Latin and Greek. So our founding fathers were well-versed. Now, not all of them. George Washington did not have a formal education. He did receive his surveyor's license, but he knew that it was so important that he demanded that his stepson go through this classical educational training. So George Washington does very well for himself. I'm sure we're all familiar. And when he left the White House, he warned of three things. And one of the most important things that he warned of was the formation of political parties. So when he leaves, it's already in the process of happening. These political parties are being seen between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. There's very different views on everything from how the government should run, how involved the government should be, to banking. It was all interconnected. And these political parties, despite his foresight on what this would turn into, formed anyway. So with that, every part of political life or every part of life, American life that we now engage in is impacted by these political parties. So you could talk about taxes, you could talk about war, security, medicine, and of course, education. Over time, the Democrats and the Republicans have kind of formed their views. The Democratic Party became known as the Educational Party, and they really wanted to run their platform on things such as free public education, which was run by tax dollars. Also universal preschool. They believe in Title I funding, school-based healthcare, expanding opportunities for CTE programs, and higher education. They also believe in teaching about LGBTQ education and reducing our student loan burden of our college graduates. On the other hand, you have the Republican Party, who believes that charter schools should be a choice and having choice and school voucher programs. They also want to limit the role of the federal government in education. They believe in performance-based staff retention, merit pay, including businesses in the classroom, as well as teaching abstinence-based approach for health education. They also have lobbied to end federally funded loans. Now, I am not here to tell you which side is better or which has the right ideas. That's not my place. No. That's not my place. What I do want to tell you is that they're both passionate and adamant that their beliefs are what is best for our children. So they do what they can while in office, while having power, to promote their agenda, because that is how change happens. But that's also the problem. So now that I've given you a little bit of background on how this goes and what these two parties look like, and just to be fair, I want to preface this too by saying that there's so much more involved with the political parties and these stances than just the lists I've rattled off to you. These things are complicated, and they're intense, and they run very deep through American history. So there's reasons behind both of these parties' stances on education. So now that I've given you the background, I do want to talk about some of the primary and subsequent issues that we have in education. The primary issue here is that children are our winners in education reform and policy politics, but they're also the losers. They're the ones who get used as a pawn in a political chess game. Teachers is another primary issue. Basically, they've learned just to wait it out. It's maybe 4 years before a policy changes. Maybe it's 8 years. But how many different politicians have we seen in our lifetimes or as our career as educators to know that the pendulum swings both ways? And in waiting it out, you do not have to reinvent the wheel. We know that this will eventually swing back to the way things used to be. Because politics and policies are ever changing depending on who's in power, we have the subsequent issue of real change never gets accomplished. There's lots of great ideas. You talk about Achieve 2000, No Child Left Behind, the ever flawed A Nation at Risk, although well-intentioned. There are lots of things that happen, and there's lots of ways for people to put their name and their stamp on how education is supposed to work. But real change never has the time to sink in and latch on, because the parties are constantly changing, as are their ideals. So it's a cycle of priorities, and it's a cycle of viewpoints, and we really don't know what the next one's going to be and what the impact on education is. I hypothesize that it hampers education, and it ties our hands as educators into implementing the change that we know that we need as a profession and what we need to do for our students. There is supporting data for this, and really it's historical data. So the Supreme Court of the United States historically has doubled down on the fact that education is not among the fundamental rights that are afforded to us in our federal Constitution. They have done that time and time again, court case after court case. But when you look back in history, you can find that there is support of education in general. So if you go back to 1954 and you look at the Brown versus Board of Education case, they will tell you that all children are entitled to a free public education, equal opportunity based on, despite their race, their ethnicity, their background, religion, their sex, socioeconomic status, or citizenship status. The Board of Education guaranteed that for all students. However, because the Supreme Court does not recognize it as a federal right, our founding fathers did not include it in their in the Constitution or in any of the amendments. Basically, what our 10th Amendment says is that any rights that are not specifically entitled to the federal government, then by default are delegated to the states. So this is why you have a political battleground over education, because the federal and the state government don't have the same rights to education, and each state government is very, very different. So when you look at different achievement rates, if you look at different reading rates, different standardized test scores, a lot of times they vary drastically from state to state because the priorities of the people in charge of those states are different. So what do we do about it? Oh, I'm sorry, our stakeholders. Basically, again, this is the state government. These are this is your federal government. This is your local governments, your boards of education. Really, it's American society, and most importantly, our children. They are the ones who have the most to gain from getting rid of this political turmoil that always surrounds public education. Some of our potential solutions, and these might not be the best ones, I'm not necessarily advocating that these are the best choices to kind of squash this problem, but we can institute, and when I say we can, the government can institute an amendment that guarantees a free public education to all of our students. If you look at other countries, for example, we talked a lot about Finland this semester. And if you look at Finland's constitution, they guarantee a free education for their students. It makes it a priority. It makes it a respected profession, and it makes it important to the citizens. So by doing that, it sends a very strong and powerful message to the country, to the world, that we value education and we value how that translates for our kids. We could set a set of national standards to formalize the process of education, everything from teacher training to professional learning to basic guidelines for graduation. That can be done. But really what I think is most important and probably most likely, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek, because a bipartisan task force is probably the only way to make any true reforms in education. Now, when I went over those lists of things for you about the Democrats and the Republicans and said, you know, this is what people hold dear to their hearts, having a bipartisan come together, a bipartisan task force come together to say, yes, we agree on all these things, education, is a long stretch. But if you come up with several ideals and you have people who are committed, possibly with an educational background, that it's going to be treated like a priority, again, not like a pawn. So what does this look like? What policy implications does this have? Basically, it would shake up education in terms of long-lasting, meaningful reforms. It would also have a unified vision and a goal for all our children. We would have a basic standard of expectation and achievement and goals for our kids. And we're going to have highly qualified teachers who will find stability in this reform. So if we continue to let partisan politics drive our value of education, there are plenty of historical examples that can show us our future. Our students, our teachers, our society deserve better than that. And I think Patrick Henry said it best when he says, I have but one lamp to guide my feet by, and that's the lamp of experience. I know of no way of judging the future but by the past. It's a very smart man. Thank you for your time.